All right, podcast time here. While I was sitting here driving the other day, I thought, well, this will be an interesting podcast topic, so I might as well go ahead and hit the record button. And again, this is going to be another podcast topic where I'm just going to talk off the cuff. I have absolutely no notes, no bullet points, nothing to guide me, nothing to steer me in the direction except for the thought process that I had in mind. And this is going to be an interesting podcast because I know that it affects numerous guys that are out in the field today. And it doesn't matter what your craft is. I don't care if you're an iron worker. I don't care if you're a pipe fitter. I don't care if you're an electrician. It doesn't matter. It affects you all. And what I'll say is I'm going to expand on this, but what I'm going to say is something that you have probably never heard, and maybe you have, but it's likely that you've never heard it put quite this way. And that's this. You are not just filling your whatever you work. If you're an iron worker, I would say you're not just an iron worker. If you're a pipe fitter, I'd say you're not just a pipe fitter. If you are an electrician, I would say you're not just an electrician. If you're a crane operator, same thing. If you are an elevator mechanic, it doesn't matter. Pick your, and this doesn't even have to apply to the trades at this point. This can apply to a whole litany of other things that you do. And I'm going to expand on this. Now, this is typically leveled at men because men seem to really over-identify almost in what we do. And in other words, if I have a conversation with someone, you can usually bet, and this is the case for a lot of guys, in about 5 to 10 minutes of conversating, maybe even earlier than that, I'm going to ask you what you do for a living. I'm genuinely curious. And to some degree, an accusation could probably be leveled that some people make a judgment against you or about you on what you do for a living. I don't know that it's fair, but it certainly seems to be the reality. The reality is we do make those types of judgments. And what we end up doing, because we're so good at what we do, right? We're so good at working that we overemphasize who we are, and it's in a direct connection with what we do. And I understand this. I understand this to a significant degree because when you step outside of what you do, let's just say you've been doing iron work, or you've been a pipe fitter, or you've been an electrician, or you've been whatever. You've been doing something. You've been doing something for 25 years. It doesn't have to be that long for it to be effective, but I'm going to use 25 years, and then you go do something else, and what do? You feel lost. Why? Because for 25 years, you have done this thing over here. This is what you've done. And now, after 25 years, you're doing this. And you've overemphasized as far as who you are as a person into those 25 years and what you've done and the enormous amount of hours that you've probably and likely worked. And this has become your identity. You're an iron worker. You're a pipe fitter. You're an electrician. 25 years later, now I'm this. But this isn't who I've been for all these years. And so I'm having a very difficult time trying to figure out who I am, quite frankly, because I've overemphasized who I am as an individual, who I am as a person, who I am as a human being made in the image of God. And I've reduced it. I said it. I have reduced that to a mere occupation. Now, that's not to diminish the brotherhood, right? That's not to diminish I've gotten really close with some people. Some of them we've made family, right? Blood's thicker than water. But there is the other side of this where there's like a lot of individuals they choose to be your family. A friend sticks closer to a brother. That's not to diminish any of that. It's just merely to say that as good as it feels to work and to do work that we enjoy and to make inroads and all this stuff, It's just to say that we overemphasize who we are as individuals, and we do it at we do it at our occupational level. And I'm here today to tell you that that's not what we should be doing. We should not identify ourselves with solely identify ourselves with our occupation. Meaning, I shouldn't just say to you, hey, I'm an iron worker. I am an iron worker, and I've been one for a long time. But you know what? I'm also a writer. I write a lot. For those of you who have, you might just be, listeners to podcasts and you haven't been over to the website yet. I have a tally of all of the articles I've written, every single word. I know the word count that I've written. It's close to 500,000 words. I know the cumulative total of the articles that are over there. That's how I can emphatically say that a lot of the articles on the website are about 2,500 words or a 10 to 12 minute read because it's substantive in nature. So I'm not just an iron worker then, right? I'm also a writer. But you know what else I do? I do a lot of research. Am I a researcher? I do a lot of reading. I'm an avid reader. I podcast. I'm sitting here having a conversation with you guys right now about this very thing. It's a whole litany of things that I do. But then you also compound it with some other things, which we'll expand because I want to illustrate to you that you are not just an ironworker, pipe fitter, electrician, etc. Your occupation is not who you are. And I suppose that's the first thing we need to address is that no matter how much you enjoy your job, no matter how much time you have spent at your job, no matter how much time you find yourself locked in doing XYZ, it does not have to define you. And indeed, I'd go so far as to say that it should not define you. Now, it can define you as your just in sole occupational realm. Like, here's my occupation. I am an iron worker as far as what I do for a living, but it's not solely me. However, you could also make the case that someone could say, well, I'm a hard worker. And that would fit and cover a whole litany of different skilled trades. But if you had to identify yourself, at the very least, understand that it is not the totality of you. And I am an iron worker that in just an occupation alone. And there is a distinction there that clearly needs to be made. And the reason why I say that is because if I say I'm an iron worker and it's not just in the occupational realm, then I can take all the various negative traits that are associated with whatever my occupation is, and I bring them into the rest of my life, the rest of my personal life, the rest of what I'll say are the things that I'm doing or the other things that should be defining who I am. I'm bringing all of you can say positive aspects too of your occupation, but you might as well say all the negative ones as well. And what do I mean? Well, think about your chosen profession and all the negative aspects that are associated with whatever it is that you do for a living. If you solely identify, if all you do is identify with that particular occupation, then all the positives and all the negatives are then brought into the other aspects of your life that should be used to create and define a more well-rounded person. So what are those positive traits? You're a hard worker. Yep, sure. Got that. You got a lot of skill and talent. Yep. Are there negative connotations to whatever you do? Whether they are from the public and they're perceived or whether they are real. In my case, in the trades, ironworkers can have a bad reputation of doing some dumb stuff. And so I don't want any of that to bleed into the rest of the aspects of my life. And the reason why is because ironwork doesn't define me in that way, nor should it define you. I don't want it to define me in that way. I don't. Let me expand on that just a little bit more. In addition to being an iron worker from an occupational perspective and being a researcher and a writer and a podcaster, you know what I also am? I'm also a father. I'm also a husband. And I sure as hell don't want ironwork and the occupational me to bleed into that. When I tuck my kids in bed every night, or I talk to my kids, or I'm playing with them, or I'm listening to them, or whatever, I don't need to be iron worker. I need to be dad. I need to be dad. Likewise, when I'm talking to my wife, or we're listening, or we're having a conversation, we're planning trips, or what are we going to do with the kids, or how are we going to make this work, or what should we do, et cetera, et cetera. I need to be husband. I don't need to be iron worker. And therein lies one of the significant differences, and quite frankly, the dangers that exist as a skilled tradesman, or a man in general, in your work, is that we carry our work home, which is to be expected to some degree. I don't know how individuals compartmentalize to the degree that they don't think about work when they go home at all. But what we do is we bring all the negative associations and connotations with our occupation, and we bring it into the other aspects of our life. We'll bring it into home. We'll bring it into our relationship with our wife. We'll bring it into our relationship with our kids. And inadvertently, what happens is that they understand your spouse, your children, they understand. There's something intuitive about it, that they understand that you're defining yourself by work, and it seems like you don't take your work off enough, even just to spend a few minutes with them. And I know that there are people listening to me who understand what I'm saying. And if you were to look back in your life, you can see this happening. And let me tell you what the next danger looks like by bringing in or over identifying as your craft, or what you do, your occupation, into your family life, is that people, because you identify solely who you are with your occupation, what inevitably turns out to be the case for so many guys is the what I'll say is, I overemphasize that aspect of my life. I prioritize that aspect of my life. And so many times we justify that decision. We justify, over identifying as an iron worker, a pipe fitter, electrician, accountant. I don't care. Pick your trade. It doesn't matter to me. Pick your occupation. I overemphasize that particular craft, and I over prioritize it over my family, over my relatives, over my hobbies, whatever I happen to be involved in, all the other various areas of my life that make me who I am and that make you who you are. We overemphasize and over prioritize who we are at work, to the detriment of them. And if it's not you listening that can resonate with me, then it is somebody that that can connect and resonate with what I'm saying. Far too often, there have been so many individuals who prioritize work because we over identify with it, and they leave their families behind. They leave them in the dust. And when they look back 20 years from now, in the pursuit, not even the obtainment, but the pursuit of gathering more toys, gathering more possessions, gathering more money, they leave all that is really valuable behind. And when they look back, they see that wake of destruction as they've plowed forward without any regard, real regard, to who their family is and what they're doing to them. And 20 years from now, your kids are all grown up. Your wife and your wife and you are estranged. And if you had a time machine, there's so many guys, if they had a time machine, would go back and change the way that they did things. And I'm telling you, at the core of it, one of them is we over identify with what we do for a living to the detriment of everything else that is us, everything else that makes us who we are, and all these other areas of our life. All of this is pushed off to the wayside, and it's muscled away because of this, because we overemphasize who we are occupationally. And so you might think, well, how do I not do this? It seems as though work is built into the way that work is, the way that the schedule is, the way we work. It's all caked into that realism that I'm supposed to go to work and I'm supposed to identify who I am. My dad taught me that. My grandfather taught me that. He was always talking about, boy, whatever your occupation is, this is who you are, and that kind of stuff. How do we get past? How do we change that perspective of who we are? Well, first off, we need to realize if you realize you're already halfway there. If you realize that you are not the sum total of your occupation, then you are already halfway there, because you can't solve a problem that you will not admit exists. And so, for those of you who are at least asking the question, whether it's during this podcast episode or you were already thinking about it and then came to this podcast episode, you're already ahead of so many others because you acknowledge the problem exists. Secondly, it would behoove you to think about who you really are. Most of us, again, we wrap up our identity into our occupation, and everything else in our life comes for the ride. But what that policy, that thought process, life that life mantra, if we were to put words to it, is I live to work and not work to live. That's what so many of us do when we overemphasize who we are. We live to work. And get that out of your head. In the construction industry, it certainly is feast or famine. So I'm not dismissing the hot, cold, a lot of overtime, no overtime. I'm not dismissing that difficult balance that we're trying to find. I'm merely saying that we don't need to overemphasize with our occupation, and that we need to understand that there are other parts of our life. And so when we work it out, go, okay, I need to try to somehow get in my head that I'm not here to live to work. I want to work so that I can then live, so that I have. And then you might say, well, what does that look like? Well, first off, do you have a family? If you are married and if you have children, then you need to prioritize the time that you have with them. Don't overemphasize what you do occupationally to the detriment of your family. That means setting aside time for them. That means continually pouring into them. That means making sacrifices so that you don't miss these times. Because listen, hear me say this for you that are listening and you have young kids. You will know, statistically speaking, you will know your kids far longer as an adult than you will as a kid. Those years are precious and fleeting, and by overemphasizing what we do, we make a choice. Even though we say we don't make a choice, we do make a choice. And we're choosing to basically put their childhood on the back burner. And we're missing a lot. And if we were honest with ourselves, we could all wish we could go back and do it differently, and we would make different decisions. And that's the truth of the matter. Secondly, I would say that's what your kids, even more importantly, as maybe you may not think of this, but if you stood there and you have a spouse and you're married, guess what? Your wife was there before your kids. And if you meant anything with your vows, she will be there after your kids, which means your marriage needs to be a very high priority. And it's very difficult to prioritize that when we prioritize the occupation. Keep that in mind. And one of the best things you could ever do for your kids is to let them see you love their mom and prioritize your marriage. But even then, even with your family, as important as they are, and they absolutely are, that still isn't the sum total of who you are. Here's what I mean. What do you find interesting? What are your interests and what are your hobbies? And you might rightly say to me, what do you mean hobbies? I don't have any time for that. I'm always, doing, I'm an iron worker, or I'm a pipe fitter. I'm an electrician. It's feast or famine. I'm working a lot of hours. I'm not working any hours. I've got a lot going on. I don't have any hobbies. Understood. Get it. Especially true when you're young and you've got a young family and you're trying to balance all of these things or whatever. But not having hobbies at the expense of, let's say, too much time occupationally is a detriment to you. Do you know how? And you can ask, if you're listening to this podcast, all you need to do is ask older guys out on the job site or wherever you happen to work. All you need to do is ask them, do you know anybody who went to go retire, didn't have any hobbies, and they just went downhill quickly? You 100%, you 100% will find somebody who will tell you, yes, I know this person, this person, this person, this person. They weren't active. They didn't stay mentally sharp. They didn't stay physically fit. They didn't stay physically doing anything. They didn't have anything to eat up their time. They just sat and their health declined and they passed away far too early. Why? Because they over identified with their occupation. And whatever your occupation is, that is a dangerous thing. We need to have interests, and we need to have hobbies. Hobbies obviously take far more time than interest. Interest can become hobbies. Hobbies don't become interests. But we need to have things that are stimulating. And I don't mean just ridiculous doom scrolling and the sexually provocative and the humorous. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about things that challenge you, things that help you grow, things that you find enjoyable, things that don't make you compare yourself to other people, which is what social media does. I'm talking about things that you can hone some skills and enjoyment out of, that you're able to maybe even share with your kids at some point in time, or share with other people. But having something, or a few different somethings that you enjoy, that keep you mentally engaged, and so you don't decline and go downhill and lose all of that stuff. This is also, in addition to your occupation and in addition to your family, another piece of who you are. We so often seem to one-dimensionally define ourselves by occupation, when there's so much more to the human being than just what you do for a living. And hopefully, after all this time into this initial, monologue podcast, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. You know it intuitively. He's exactly right. I do prioritize work over my family. I bring the negative things home, and from that connotation, oh yeah, I do push my family off to the side and prioritize work. I need to make that adjustment. I can see where he's coming from. Oh, that's right. I personally know somebody whose health took a decline because, they didn't pay any attention to the need for hobbies and mental engagement, et cetera, et cetera. And that has brought me to a point that made me recognize I need to have things to do and not over identify myself with my occupation, and so on and so on and so on, until it gets to a point where I'm going, he's making sense. He's making sense here. To not focus on the occupational nature of what we do, and not solely identify with that, as strong as the urge actually is. I plead with you to listen and to understand and to recognize that that makes you a one-dimensional individual. And you are so much more than that one-dimensional individual. You are a comprehensive, complex human being made in God's image, worth so much more than what I have just described. And don't get wrapped up. There will be people, 100%. Misery loves company. You will find individuals who solely identify themselves. I'm an iron worker. It defines everything I do. I'm not going to say that every single person you find like this is miserable, but there will be a lot of them. There will be a lot of them, because a lot of people, when we make mistakes, and we go through the trauma, and we look back, and all our families have been decimated because we've done some dumb stuff and made bad decisions, and we've over identified with who we are as an occupation. We dig our heels in, as it were, and we say, yeah, that's okay, no big deal. I'm an iron worker. Remember, I'm an electrician. I'm a pipe fitter. This is what we do. This is how it is. I don't need to lean into my stereotypes, which is a whole different podcast episode, by the way. But I don't need to lean in. What I need to do is go, I can recognize somebody who overemphasized who they were as their occupation and allowed that to define them. And what that, defining has done is it has turned them into somebody that is so one-dimensional that they literally have all the toys and nobody to share them with. I implore you that as you're navigating through, and this is especially true for those of you who are young, as you're navigating through the various things about your life, don't overemphasize who you are as an individual, isolated solely to the occupational. You are far more comprehensive and complex than what a lot of people will make it out to be. And the reason, and here's what I'll say is how shall I put this? Here is the particularly damning reason for this. If I had to distill it down from a live to work perspective, I'd say it's an enormously effective piece of propaganda. If you are who you are as an occupation, then you live to work, which means, guess what? I, as the industry, if you will, I get more of your attention. I get more of your focus. I get more of your clarity. I get more of you, and every other aspect of you gets less. So I like that part about this. That's what it says when you live to work. I enjoy getting the most out of you, and there's not enough left over for anybody else and anything else. It's kind of nefarious almost. And hopefully, taking out this paintbrush and painting this elaborate picture has helped you to see just how one-dimensional it seems to be when you are over-identifying who you are, in relation to your occupation. So, and there you have it. This monologue, this diatribe of me talking to you saying, hey, and there you have it. This monologue of me saying, don't over-identify with what you do for a living. You are much more than that. Make sure you capitalize on the fact that you are much more than that. And thank you for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate the time. You got some comments, you can leave them. You can leave them in the video here, or you can leave them at www.thewealthyironworker.com. You can go to the contact page and drop me a line there. And there you have it. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and informed out there. I'll see you on the next one.